Aloha Manga Club, it's your boy Lohali signing in with the one and only Based Sempai, the man who's been on MangaTube longer than most of us can even picture it being actual genre. How are you doing today, Based?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on here.
Dude, it's always a pleasure because you and I end up having some very interesting topical discussions, and today the topic that you wanted to bring forth was actually about fighting in MMA style manga, which is something that I really love, and there's a ton of different like subgenres in there. You have your pure like sports fighting, you know, MMA style. In my opinion, delinquent manga can also fall into this MMA kind of style fighting. So it's a lot more diverse of a genre than most people actually even realize. So, but I know you wanted to start off by really defining what makes a good MMA fighting manga. So let's start there.
Personally, I've had the pleasure of experiencing a few, mainly it's that shonen, seinen tournament style layout that we're all familiar with, where they introduce the main character, and then you have the big bad on the other side of the bracket, and then they eventually, meet up at the very top and duke it out, and it's all very predictable. However, that is why I think Kengan Ashura is the greatest tournament manga of all time, and anything else kind of pales in comparison.
Which is interesting because I've never actually read Kengan Ashura. I can't even pronounce it properly, but I did watch the anime, and I enjoyed it actually. But what actually sparked this discussion was the difference between Kengan Ashura and Hajime no Ippo, but we wanted to take it a step further and just talk in general. And I know that you always defend Kengan Ashura over Baki, and I'm going to actually agree with you here, right off the bat, which is weird for me to say, especially when it's you and I, because I love disagreeing with you sometimes. It's just a little bit fun. A little bit fun.
I don't blame you.
So what makes a good fighting manga? Like, what makes that tournament style fight so enjoyable to you?
Well, and we can discuss Baki and Ippo, but we can also just turn this up to like shonen tournament arcs as well. Like Yu Yu Hakusho had a famous arc, the Dark Tournament. We have almost every shonen battle manga has a tournament arc, but for this discussion, we'll just keep it to like why Kengan Ashura was so successful in its own tournament style. So, in my opinion, it has to be unpredictable. You can't just have, fight A, go to fight B to fight C, and then top it off with that final big bad boss fight. Kengan Ashura introduces 32 highly different and very eccentric cast of characters, and honestly, it sets it up in a way where the big bad is on the other side of the bracket, but it doesn't quite end up how you think it is. Like if I laid you out the tournament arc and you've read the first 5 volumes of exposition to set it up, and I said, guess the top 4, you would not be able to guess the top 4, in my opinion.
Interesting. I do agree. I think unpredictability in a tournament fighting manga is of paramount importance, just because if you can't guess what's going to happen, if you can't guess who's going to win, it makes it that much more exciting. Exactly. It makes it so that you're on the edge of your on the edge of your freaking seat, and it makes it so that the training that has to happens because the character is not strong enough.
Now, the difference between Kengan Ashura and most tournament style manga is that the main protagonist doesn't necessarily go through a training arc. He shows up on the scene kind of overpowered for the lowly crime, degenerate, delinquent kind of fighting he was used to. But Kengan Ashura is a 21 to 22 volume straight tournament arc. There's 5 volumes of exposition of like, hey, let's get to the tournament, and then the rest of it is just the tournament. It's going down the bracket. Each fighter is getting a full. It's not just like you skip over every single fight. Is like 2 to 3 chapters backstory, setting up these characters to be like, are they dark horses? Are they jobbers? Or is this a potential? Is he way stronger than the character that you were originally thinking he was going to win? It's very interesting. just to see it all, pan out essentially.
And I think, like, taking a look at it, the artwork is really interesting. It's different. And, this is talking... I don't want to talk about the anime as much because for me, I don't quite like that 3D cell shading that they did for parts of it. It felt very off. If we're talking aesthetically, if we're talking pure aesthetics, like Baki versus Kanagashira, like anime, I will give it to Baki that it looks better, in my opinion. And that's
you're right, because I think the difference between the Baki adaptation and the Kengan Ashura one is that the Kengan one is almost full CGI. It is almost the whole CGI, and where I think Kengan's CGI is better than Baki's, because when Baki goes from the standard art style, like the anime art style, and then it switches to the CGI stuff, it's very jarring.
It is.
But overall, I think Baki, that art style works for what it's trying to do, but pretty much the only thing Kengan Ashura anime did for me is make me read the manga. That's just exactly what it did for me.
Well, and I think that's important because it shows that the actual manga itself is willing to kind of come in and not necessarily play second fiddle, but bring people in from what they've been watching, which I think is pretty interesting. Like, if you watched Baki and you went to try to read it, it's almost impossible. Like, I'm going to be honest here, you have to know exactly where to start, so you're not picking it up randomly in the middle of the story.
That is a major gripe with Baki for me, is because the anime, I knew of Baki before, and however, I don't know, it was just, I knew it was a thing, and then I was like, all right, let me watch this Baki, and then it didn't make sense at first. Because it starts in season 3,
which is
season 2 technically.
It's season 2, but there were 2 parts to the original first season. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
It's technically season 3, but it's part 2 in the manga. And for those who don't know, Baki part 2 starts 44 volumes in.
Yeah.
So you're missing literally an entire
story. Series. You're missing half the story. Like, Baki. Yeah. I love Baki to absolute death, but I also got into it in the most random, crazy way. And I can't even begin to explain where it all kind of went down. I picked it up one place, and it does the manga itself does a decent enough job of kind of explaining what happened in the previous, so you don't necessarily have to read it, but the story does build on top of itself.
And that's an also thing where the anime also wavers at some points, is because it just goes into almost rehashing content. Like, you've seen this guy, you know exactly what he's about, and then in the manga it doesn't do that. They just expect you to know because you've read 44 volumes. These characters have been a main staple in the entire series. They have been antagonists, they've been buddy sidekicks, and then when they're introduced, you remember almost towards the end of the second part of Baki, they're throwing characters at you, and these characters from the start of the series, but they're going in oh, he's Baki's teacher, this is Baki's brother, this is Baki's, and giving back.
I was oh my god, Baki. If you start with Baki at the beginning, you're okay, this all makes sense. I will 100% agree. The nice thing that Kengan Ashura did is it started from the very beginning. The new series of Baki, if it had started, basically just rebooted the entire thing and done, a movie for that very first season that from 20 years ago. It was 20 years ago, man. Just rebooted at this point and give it maybe the Brotherhood treatment, but yeah. And then, I'll admit, the fights in Kengan Ashura make more sense. There's a reason for the fights to happen, not just because, I want to be stronger than so-and-so.
Yeah, now this is another the main draw of Baki, in my opinion, is you get to see when you watch the anime, Baki's already overpowered. He's strong.
Oh yeah.
Back when the manga started, he's kind of getting in his groove, but he's still a generic kind of weakling, but he's obviously he's not really, but it's you're growing with the character.
Yeah, he's starting at like slightly above regular street level. Like he doesn't have any trouble with like random thugs. You know, groups of like 10, 15 he has a little bit of an issue with, but then like it progresses his power. Like each series, you're like, okay, it adds a little bit more to his power, a little bit more to his ethos, a little bit more to his mentality. And just kicking the manga in, you're like, oh, like you're like, okay, this is kind of dope. With the anime, it's just like, nope, he is an overpowered god amongst men, and it's not coming. Since I knew the background of Baki, it made the anime a lot more enjoyable. Since I knew where he started, and I knew all the trials and tribulations that he had to go through to get to this point. But just starting in, like, if you look at him, like, dude, he wiped the floor with 4 of the most bad prisoners in the entire world.
Yeah, now that's another. I feel like Baki's a little bit more grounded in the first 44 volumes, and then once they get to the criminal arc, which is what the anime covers 44 onwards.
Yep.
I mean, that stuff is where it really gets a little bit bonkers. Like stuff happens that shouldn't be happening. You have like genetically altered humans with like the switchblades in the elbows and the toes and stuff like that.
I don't even want to talk about the Pickle Saga. Like, don't get me wrong, I love it because I love over the top like shonen, but the Pickle Saga is ridiculous. 130 million year old frozen caveman.
I mean, he fought Sasquatch in the first part. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous if you think about it. But that's where I think Kengan Ashura is. It starts off and it kind of just, it's a thrill ride the whole way through. Obviously you have some exposition in the beginning, the setup, you have character introductions, you have some bad guys and antagonists. Like the antagonists they set up from the beginning aren't even like really a main focus. Like they're scary individuals that like other people have to deal with. It's Baki they're like, this guy he's big. And then Baki beats him, and then, oh, but this guy he's better. And then Baki beats him, and then, oh, but this guy's the one. Baki beats him. It's kind of predictable, and that's kind of why I feel like King Ashura is the superior series.
And I think because I was doing a little bit of research, obviously, before we started this, so I could have a well-informed opinion. Somebody put it, and kind of taking a look at the manga itself a little bit, they're both, I don't want to say realistic grounded fighting series. They're both, I mean, obviously they're not fully realistic, but one of them is, you know, King Ashura is like more like you could see it happening closer in real life, whereas Baki, like, Yujiro punched the ground and stopped a frickin' earthquake.
Okay, yes, they are both, I would say they're the most unrealistic, realistic fighting series you could possibly read, in a sense of where the muscle groups and like the very detail of what they're doing when it comes to fighting styles, muscle groups they're targeting, things that exist in real life. He's just, however, both of them are exaggerating it and turning the dial up to like 12.
Yeah.
In a sense, like people aren't taking out, like, I think the most unrealistic thing in King Ashura is, you have he is a Japanese Secret Service like undercover guy who is also a top level surgeon who took out part of his femur and inserted it into his forearm to like have switchblade things like Assassin's Creed. It was
weird.
That's one of the things, and then obviously Aniba with who can control his hair. Those are fantasy tropey characters that obviously didn't equate much to the series, but they're still a level of fantasy that you cannot expect from, you know, real life.
Absolutely. Well, I will say, I think because I can never remember the name of the author, but I think the artwork for both serves to tell the story in a different kind of way. And I think it's reflected. I think it's reflected. Like with Baki, the people are exaggerated, just like you can tell there's a really solid understanding of the human anatomy behind every single character, but it's just exaggerated to the absolute top degree.
And if you put Baki and Kengan Ashura side by side and just compared the art, I I don't know how people prefer Baki's art style. I mean, some of it is it's
Weird.
dated. It is weird. It is dated. It's not aesthetically pleasing. I can see what he's trying to do, but it doesn't, like the sumo wrestlers. Those guys look like turtles with no necks. They are very, I don't know. I guess they're kind of realistic because Kengan has a sumo wrestler as well, but his like, what is it? Vascularity is like, sumo wrestlers don't have veins popping out of their shoulders and stuff and forearms. But I mean, it's more aesthetically pleasing to see this jacked up sumo wrestler with, he completely sculpted out, juiced up out of his mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, I can agree. I think the other thing that you have to think about with Baki is when it was created originally. Like,
was it the 80s?
1991 was when the first chapter came out. So it is, like, the art style is dated for a reason. It's old. Like, this is before Shonen really came to what it was, whereas Kanagashira started in 2012. So I mean, Kanagashira, I mean, if I had to really kind of lay something down, it'd be, is it fair to judge the artwork from almost 30 years ago to the same standard that we have now? Like, there's a 21-year difference between the art style that started with Baki and where Baki would be at this second time. If you take a look at it, it's still exaggerated, and he's still using his same style of art, but it does feel like it's more evolved.
It's definitely, I would say, because Kengan's art style evolves over time. It's very like almost amateur-esque in the very like first 3 or 4 volumes. He's still like, it's good, but it's rough, if you know what I mean.
We're not talking one rough, but it's, yeah.
No, it's still good, but it's not, like, by the time you get to like, even the jump from like volumes like 6 to 10 is pretty insane. And then by the time you get to 20, it's through the roof. It almost looks like it's another illustrator. It's kind of unreal. But then when you look at Baki, it's almost like Baki had the same art style for like 80 volumes. It's kind of ridiculous. Like, it never changed.
It didn't, I think. And you know what? There's one thing, I'm not trying to give Baki any credit here, mainly because there's a series that we're obviously going to have to talk about here in a split second, but I think the art style has evolved, and that's Hajime no Ippo. The art style from chapter 1 to chapter 1300 is completely different. I mean, it's still the same feeling, but as I think one thing that George Morikawa did perfectly is he started to see where the trends for characters were going to be, and he started to mold his characters and change his art style just a little bit. Not enough to like be drastic, but every volume you could see him get progressively better. Whereas Baki, I agree, it stayed for the first 40 volumes for Grappler Baki. It didn't. Yeah. It stayed in that 90s style.
And I also, another point to bring up, I hate to even bring it up, but the accessibility to Kengan compared to Baki is night and day.
100% different. It's so much easier to get Kengan than it is to get Baki.
Yeah, you can find Kengan rather easy on the interwebs, but when comparing it to Baki, I haven't even finished the original because you have to. It's almost not even worth it to piece the translated speech bubbles from a website onto the page. It is not even worth it.
And it even stops like in the middle of one of the fights. Like some of the places that I found, they all stop in like almost the exact same fight in the exact same spot. They just don't progress past Grappler Baki.
That's another thing. I think part 2 is actually licensed in English, but they're missing 44 volumes of the original, which it doesn't work for me. And Kengan is obviously Ashura is finished, 27 volumes is finished, and what they're doing with Omega is they're doing that Baki underdog storyline of building this new protagonist up to be this ultimate fighter, and it's very realistic on setting expectations for how you're shown. Like they lay it out rough, like you're not as good as you think you are, bud. That's kind of what it is.
And that's, I mean, so I think at this point we can kind of agree that, you know, I will agree with you here from everything that I've seen through my research that, you know, Kengan Ashura is better in a lot of ways than Baki, like hands down. But
The only thing it's not as good at is obviously the sales. Let's not. It has a higher mouse score, but Baki has over 100 million sales, and that does matter. So
it does, and I think the one thing that I will give Kanagashira is the fact that Baki has 137 volumes compared to 27 plus 1.
Yes, I think they're at 32 or 33 for like the entire series, Kengan and Omega, but other than that, it has a leg up for sure.
I think Baki does, but now let's take a look at the one that I will actually provide a genuine fight with you on, and that is Ippo versus Kanagashira. We all know that I am probably one of the biggest American Ippo fans out there. I've read everything. I've read the entire series 4 times. I know where its exact weaknesses are, and I'm willing to admit them, but I still think it is one of the best. It is the best boxing manga. I'm not going to say MMA, I'm going to say boxing to start off.
Have you there's so few boxing series that are actually licensed in English. I think Levius is like one of the only ones, and even then that one's more melodramatic in a sense. It reminds me more of Megalobox in a sense of where the action and the characters, what they're going through outside of the ring is more important than the action that's actually going on inside the ring. And it's kind of odd because I think there's so much better stuff. Like I don't know the name of it. It's like Rikudo.
Rikudo, I've read Rikudo, and again, this could 100% be nostalgia, but Rikudo I didn't enjoy quite as much. There was something that just felt off about the entire story, that I didn't empathize, and I think part of it is how I'm able to empathize with Ippo. I think that's a major factor in this entire discussion.
Ippo's iconic. Let's not get it twisted, honestly. But in terms of how I think of how, like, I'm not really familiar with Ippo. I've obviously seen some things, but I'm making bastard claims over here saying that Kengan is better than Ippo by a mile because I have an idea of how the series Ippo lines up and kind of the flow it takes, and I don't think it's. Would you agree that Ippo is predictable?
I think it's predictable in the very beginning, especially. Again, let's take we have to think about the era that it was originally created in. Ippo was created in 1988, 1989. Back when, I hate to say it, all shonen was super predictable. Like, really predictable.
Maybe not JoJo's.
JoJo's is a little bit different, but even then, it still follows some of the predictable shonen tropes of good guy fight bad guy inevitably lose, doesn't matter. Like, I don't want to point it out like that, but that's a lot of the issues that arise. Like I said, I have read Rikudo, I've read Ashita no Jo, I have read Hajime no Ippo, and I've read not Kingdom. Well, I think it's called. Is it still called Kingdom? There's the street fighting one. It's
Kingdom. Okay, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Holy Land. Thank you. And I've read I've read a lot of these, and part of it is Ippo really lets you connect with the character, and it builds it in such a way where there have been points where I've gotten in the manga where I was like, okay, I know exactly what's about to happen. I know what's going to go down, and since I have read my fair share of shonen, and I was completely blown away by some of the things that happened. I was like, that's not supposed to be how this is. Like, there is a point in the story where one of the characters gets a loss that should not have happened, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like, it does not make any sense why he got that, and then it starts to slowly break down the mentality of why it happened to him in that way.
Okay.
I think, and Ippo is a lot harder for people to get into. 100% Ippo is probably one of the hardest manga for people to get into, partially because of accessibility, and partially because it's 1,300 chapters. Like,
yeah, that's at least a month or two of solid reading. At least.
It takes me, like, to do a proper read through, it takes me a while, and I know the story. Like, I don't have to sit there and, like, read each line. I know what's happening. I still get chills every single time that it happens. Like for every single fight, I still get chills, and I still am like, oh my god, who's gonna win? But I think there's one thing that George does exceedingly well, and it kind of shows, is he runs and owns a boxing gym. So he understands the basics of boxing to a very, very good extent. He's like, this style works against this style better. This is who should win in this fight, and it's built in such a way that you can tell there's a lot of love and respect behind the boxing, not just the fighting, but the boxing and the training behind it. Okay.
Because there, obviously with mixed martial arts in Kengan, there's more than boxing. Obviously there's boxing, and there's more Muay Thai, and then Lithwei, and Sabo, I believe that's what it's called. Like, there's so many different fighting styles that I think it allows for more creativity. And I think, at least from me being on the outside peering in, I feel like boxing is possibly stuck in a box in terms of what it can do and its potential, not as from a storytelling perspective, but from maybe an action point of view. Because obviously all they're technically doing is punching each other. You know what I mean? Obviously there's more technical stuff, but there's a limit on what they can possibly do.
That's 100% true. Boxing is very much stuffed into, you can only punch each other from the waist up. Or you can only, actually, let me rephrase that. You can only legally punch each other from the waist up. But I think what that does is it makes the author get more creative with the fights, in so much of the fact of they have to actually delve into the mentality of the character and why they're choosing a specific boxing style. It's not so much, oh, they're fighting Sabo versus Muay Thai. It's, this person is an in-boxer, this person is an out-boxer. This is why they choose this specific style of outboxing. And for me, I know a little bit about boxing, but with Ippo, I was able to kind of understand more than just the basics. I was able to actually see, okay, well, this is the old school mentality of where boxing is, where it should be, and where it can be. But what I think Ippo does probably better than any manga out there is the story. The fights are great. The fights are probably some of my favorite fights in all of Shonen. But it's the training that I think that George does well. I think that he places such an emphasis on the training and the background between each fight that the individual matches are more of a philosophy versus philosophy instead of boxer versus boxer.
Is there a arc in Ippo?
There are tons of tournament arcs.
So when those tournament arcs happen, is essentially, Ippo, and then they set up the good guy versus the bad guy on opposite brackets, and then kind of everyone jobs to the bad guy on, does everyone feel like they can win? Is there multiple angles to how the tournament is portrayed?
Yeah, there is 100%. So the only time that there's ever been, there have been times where there's obviously a solid good guy versus a solid bad guy, but the easiest way, and this might be getting a little bit into spoiler territory, so if you haven't read Ippo and you're wanting to, pause the video, whatever you want to do. But the very first tournament arc that you run into, it's called the Rookie Tournament, the Rookie King Tournament, and it's people who have just got onto the pro side of boxing for the very first time. They all have their license, and they're all just going up against each other. And it really shows the mentality of, like, natural-born talent, strategy, where things are at. And there's one guy, Mashiba, who is losing to one of the most gifted boxers in the entire thing. And they paint him as this absolute demon of a boxer. Like, they paint him as an absolutely terrible human being. And the way that he wins is completely on accident. Like, he accidentally steps on the foot of our main character's rival and, like, punches him. Like, he doesn't mean to do it, but then he sees, like, oh shit, I can win this way. And he starts doing it, and he starts, like, wailing on him, and he ends up breaking the rival character who you thought was going to be Ippo's, like, big boss fight. And so you're like, what? Okay. So you're like, okay, that was interesting. And then it even goes one step further, and you're like, it shows that this guy's willing to fight dirty, he's willing to fight bloody, and he's the big thing right now in Ippo is crossing the line, becoming that monster in the ring.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a very common thing in fighting shonen, right? Like, you can't always be a nice guy. You sometimes have to access that deeper, primal, like, violent side of yourself to win.
Yeah.
And so at this point, in those first 100 chapters, Ippo, you know, for the first 1,300 chapters, Ippo's very calm, composed. He only loses his temper like once or twice, and it shows that it's not good for him. Like, one of them, he actually tenses up so much, he one-shot KOs a guy who's like who's been trying to get him mad, like trying to do a bunch of things, and Ippo just honestly punches him once so hard in the face, like it's his solid 10. The guy gets brain damage. The guy doesn't remember the fight, and he's like, he genuinely just wanted to fight Ippo just and make him mad and see what he could do. And the guy's like, oh shit, that guy's a monster in the ring when he loses it. But Ippo walks out feeling defeated. He won the fight, but he lost the battle. That makes sense.
All right, yeah, okay. I'm starting to see the allure, but.
And then, so let me get back to this first tournament. So it turns out there was a second tournament going on at the same time. There was an East Rookie Kings and a West Rookie Kings, and you don't know anything about the West. I can't remember which one.
Okay.
You don't know anything about the other one except for who the winner is, and it builds up to Ippo and this other guy end up having to box each other. The two Rookie Kings fighting each other to come out on top. And the other guy is just as hard of a puncher as Ippo, but he has more instinct. And Ippo walks away feeling like he got lucky. Like, he ends up winning, obviously, because it's shonen. But he looks back behind him, and he sees the ghost of the other, like the spirit, the ghost, whatever you want to call it, of the other fighter, just like waiting to get in the ring, and Ippo like turns around, ready to fight again. And it's more so Ippo, you know, is coming into this ring. He's very timid. He's very meek. He was bullied. And he's going up against a guy who's full of self-confidence, full of all this. And they learn more about each other. They become good friends. They become rivals. The way that they paint it is really good. And then when losses happen, they feel like they're deserved. They're out of left field. And once the first one happens, you're like, oh, he's not invincible. Like, the whole story I've been told, like, he won't get down, he'll come up, and then 3 times he gets wailed on and just destroyed.
Do you think, because you know how in real life boxing is built up, if you lose once, your career's kind of over in a sense. It's that you've never been defeated, kind of like allure, I would say. Like, you know, like they build up one fighter to make him undefeated while they're simultaneously building up another fighter to be undefeated, and they kind of put them together, and then whoever wins goes on, continues to rise, while the other one is almost kind of thrown away or disregarded in a sense. Is it like that, or is it?
No, this is much more of that 90s, like, you lose, you have a chance to come back, right? Like, okay. Nowadays it's more, if you lose once, you're kind of screwed. But with this, especially because it does take place in the 90s, like, this is 100% like, it hasn't left the 90s yet. We're not in the 2000s. For example, we'll talk about Date. I can never say his name, but Date. He is the Japanese champion. Ippo is going to up against him, fight him, but Date had retired years ago from one major loss. Like, he got wrecked, his whole life was ruined, and he dropped boxing. He came back eventually, and he started to train again. He became Japan's best, and it was his only goal to go back and fight the guy who beat him the next time. Well, and again, spoiler territory, Ippo goes up against him, and, you know, that's Ippo's first loss. Like, he goes up against a guy who is just training to beat the world, and it's the difference between the mentality of where they're wanting to go. Ippo's wanting to know what it's like to be strong, whereas Date is wanting to know what it's like to be at the top of the world.
Out of curiosity, I don't know if it's considered spoilers, but how many times has Ippo lost in 1,300 chapters?
He's if we're talking about official matches, he's lost. He's lost 3 times in official matches. In training, he's lost more than that.
Okay, I mean, that's fine.
And his first loss was against the Japanese champion, and then it became his climb to become that Japanese champion, the baton pass, basically, of, oh, he's leaving Japan behind. You know, I have to make it to the top now because he's entrusting me with, I was his last fight here, I need to become the best here to prove that I'm worthy of his title. And then from that point on, the next fight that he loses, There are some fights that he genuinely just should have lost. Like, there's one fight that I hate with like an actual burning passion, and it's like the most hated fight in all of Ippo, and it's the Wally fight. It's just not good. Like, genuinely, it's not good.
What happens in it?
It's a guy who's only had like... Ippo's going up against a guy who's only had like 2 boxing matches, but he's pure animalistic talent.
Okay.
And Ippo should have lost. It's one of those things where the guy was so talented, like, there's no way that he should have been tougher than Ippo. He was faster, he was strong, like stronger in a sense of like he could dish, he was faster, like just overall Ippo, the only 2 things that Ippo had was he had a little bit better mental endurance, and he was a harder puncher. That was it. But the amount of damage that Ippo took, he should have lost that fight hands down.
Okay, because there's some things in like, there are some things in Ashura that almost make me feel like because it's vastly different in a sense, because they're death matches. Obviously, you can do whatever the heck you want. Anything's illegal or legal in a sense, and it's what they're doing now with Omega is there's rules. There's the 10-second knockout as they do in boxing. There's also a ring out, and there also you can't kill your opponents, which adds an interesting dynamic because some of the characters that are on the Kengan side are killers. This guy is a riot police. He's the head of the riot police in Japan.
Yeah.
And however, he's enacted so much justice as of late that he's starting to succumb to murderous and bloodlust. So he's like torturing bad guys, and he's enacting swift justice on fighters who may have lost their way, and he's pretty. Everyone thinks he's gonna kill someone in this when his fight comes up, but obviously it would be Sandrovich, who is the author of King, does such a good job of subverting your expectations of the series. You would think, hey, these two are literally contradicting characters. These would be ideal fighters. But he goes, that's too predictable. Let's do something else.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I like. And obviously, you don't know the backstories on all these characters. You mentioned it before about Ippo, about like you would think the main rival is fighting Ippo, but then he gets knocked out or he gets beaten. It's the same. It's almost the same exact thing, but on technically it almost feels like a wider scale, because I don't know how big the tournaments are in Ippo. I would say maybe 8, maybe is fair. I don't really know.
It just depends. I mean, realistically, Ippo is one big 1300 chapter tournament arc. Like, let's be completely honest, because with King and Ashura, you kind of know where it's going to end. You win the tournament, it's over. With Ippo, it's you beat the top in the world. That's the goal. And so each fight builds towards that. So to me, Ippo is just one continuous tournament arc. There's tournament arcs within it, but everything else is kind of just.
Is he at the top? Is he at the top?
Ippo, no. He's been.
Would you say this is a detriment to the series in a sense of how almost from an outside looking in, it looks like it's being dragged along?
There's points where I would agree with you. I think that George could have trimmed the fat in certain areas. I fully think that there are certain characters that were introduced that didn't need as much screen time as they've gotten, like as much panel time as they've gotten. And widely regarded, Itagaki, who was introduced, is, in my opinion, he's not a bad character, but the way that they focus on him, it's pointless, and a lot of people who've been with it for a while just don't like Itagaki. They think that he's kind of a pointless character, and when they focus on his fights, you're taking up, 25 maybe chapters trying to focus on getting his backstory, his opponent's backstory, when we could just cut it and be fine.
That's almost like, I would say, is another thing I wanted to ask as well is, does Ippo have the Dragon Ball Z effect in where bad guys become good guys after almost every fight, or they become training partners? Do they continue the job is what I'm essentially like. Obviously characters are set up the job, win or lose, but do those characters get redemption in any sense? Or
some characters do, some characters don't. It's very realistic. Like the boxers in here all have a goal. They all want something. And the way that each fight is created, you get background on the opponent. Like, even for fights that Ippo's not involved in, you get to see both fighters like training, you get to see both fighters like home life, so you get to understand them a little bit better, and you get to understand their past, which is important because it really lets you kind of say, okay, I want Ippo to win, but I understand if he doesn't, and it makes it more acceptable. Or I want X person to win, but it's understandable if he doesn't. There are a few characters like I mentioned Mashiba. It turns out that, you know, he's not actually that bad of a guy. He's very cocky, but he's also had to watch out for his sister since they were both, you know, 15, 16. Both of their parents are dead. He's had to watch out for his sister. He has an anger problem, so he's been fired from a bunch of jobs just because he has a hard time controlling his temper, and the only place that he feels normal is in the boxing ring. But even then, he doesn't feel like he has any friends because everyone else in the gym is afraid of him. They're afraid of his temper, and so he just keeps acting as this demon because he's like, oh, that's all that I know. But then you see that he starts to open up a little bit more after he loses, and Ippo kind of shows him, he's like, hey man, like, I appreciated the fight, I appreciate this. He's still kind of a dick, but he's more empathetic. Whereas there's some characters, like Brian Hawk, he's more of a secondary antagonist to a secondary protagonist in the story, and he doesn't get any redemption at all. Like, he just gets punched in the face, he gets defeated, and he becomes a broken character. Like, emotionally, mentally, he's broken. He's afraid to get back in the ring.
Okay, so like you've seen a few episodes of Kengan, so you remember the Superman, the very first, the blonde-haired guy.
Yep.
So he became good friends with the main protagonist, Oma, and then obviously things happened in the tournament, and he just realized that he wasn't where everyone else was, and so he wanted to train with the guy who apparently the guy that the dark horse in the series essentially, and he went and trained with him for 2 years and came back in Omega, and his fight's just about now starting. He's been a jobber, almost a comic relief character the whole time, but now he's came back and he's had a power up essentially, and his fights this week, I actually can't wait to see it. But like I said, for some reason I just like when when people get jobbed out to build up another character, and when they become good friends, I'd like them to have another, you know, a redemption, almost like a fight that shows that they're the main, you know, they're the real deal now. Now the problem with Sandrovich, he likes to you know, string you along and then kind of turn, you turn right at the end. Like this last fight, for example, you had the two boxers fighting. Mm-hmm. It was number one and number two, they were fighting. Number two was beating number one, essentially. Pretty much almost won the fight, and then how it turned out was the boxer who was losing threw out the guy who was absolutely dominating him. And everyone thought this guy was going to win, like everybody, and he ended up not winning. It's kind of like, what the heck, dude? Why'd you do that? And but it makes for a compelling, unpredictable story, which is, again, I think the main draw that tournament manga and just tournaments in general need to start doing, is not introducing the main villain and the main protagonist, putting them in opposite brackets, and then them squaring off at the end. I think you can do a lot more, especially when there's more participants in the tournaments, like 32, 16, et cetera, et cetera. I just think there's so many like opportunities are wasted when you introduce characters jobbing to this main villain and the main protagonist, and it's kind of stinks, but I can see why it's done.
And with Ippo, there are 100% characters that get just jobbed. Like, they show up, you get a really good backstory for them, and then they just get wrecked. And they don't come back as a boxer, but they do make different appearances in the story, and it shows how they've affected other people. And to me, that's important because it also, with Ippo, it's more of a professional sports manga, right? So these people have realized, man, this guy doesn't have very much experience. He came in and he just wrecked me. and usually Ippo leaves a wake of destruction in his path. Like, you're not gonna come out unscathed. You know, people come out with broken ribs, people come out with, you know, major blunt force trauma to the face, like a bunch of that stuff. And it's just the characters that do job, they show up later in the series. They're still involved with boxing, but they're more of a coach now instead of an actual fighter. Or
do they go into Painkillers in I don't know if they'd go into Painkillers in a shonen series. But do they go to any of that in Ippo?
So there was one fight, and it's not so much like drug addiction Painkillers. It's Ippo busted his hand. Like, he punched somebody so hard, so many times, like his hand became almost, not pulp, but it fractured his hand, and he was afraid to punch full force. So they gave him lidocaine injections into his hand so he wouldn't be able to feel when he was punching during training. And they also put what is that called? An extra rubber piece while he was training around his knuckles so he could still punch, but the reverb wasn't as bad. So they've touched on, numbing the pain, going through training. The thing that
What about steroids? Do they?
They haven't touched on steroids, and I think part of that is, one, it's a shonen. I think it's going to be a lot harder to touch on the steroid aspect of it. And two, in the 90s Japanese boxing, I'm not sure how prevalent steroids were.
It's fair. That's fair.
Whereas with something like, Kanagashira and Baki, like with Baki, you got Jack Hanma, who is 100% steroids. I'm guessing that Kanagashira touches on steroids pretty deeply, where where the characters use it to take themselves to that next level.
They have this German engineering is what they call it. He is a sports scientist. He's one of the leading people in the sports medicine science industry or field, and he is juiced to the gills.
Yep.
I've never seen a bigger human in my life. And then that's when they do it. They tied him up, chained. They did, how people strongmen pull the trucks and the buses and stuff like that. They had that harness on him, and then they let this guy in a Formula One car on the other side, go 0 to 60 and see if he would do it or he can stop it. And obviously that guy didn't make it because he flew out of his car. But it's still the fantasy elements. Obviously, Ippo probably has some fantasy elements to it.
Ippo is fairly grounded for a shonen, in my opinion. The Wally fight is the only time that it kind of really breaks that fantasy element.
Yeah.
But it dives a lot more. I think if somebody's looking for a pure battle, just fight on fight with good character development, I think Ippo is a great place to look. It's obviously long, but there are places where you can find the entire thing. And if you're dedicated enough, you read a few chapters a night, and you get to also see, if you take a look at chapter 1 Ippo versus chapter 1300 Ippo, you also get to see this evolution of art that I think is a lot harder for other characters to notice, other series to notice, because Dragon Ball Z, the second that Dragon Ball Z became a thing, his art style didn't really change.
No, it's pretty standard.
From Dragon Ball to Dragon Ball Z, there was a nice shift, but from Dragon Ball Z onward, it didn't change from series to series. Whereas with Ippo, each progressing each arc, the artwork gets better and better and better.
Yeah, for sure. It's really nice to see artists kind of evolve over time. Obviously, I don't know if the mangaka for Ippo is just one dude or he has two. It's like an illustrator and a story writer.
I think with George, everything that I've seen, it's written and illustrated exclusively by him.
Okay.
I mean, obviously he has assistants doing the backgrounds and stuff, I think, but they don't ever mention assistants.
Okay, yeah. So Sandrovich has an illustrator. He actually does 2 series in the same magazine. He does that How Heavy Are the Dumbbells You Lift, that kind of ecchi comedy, highly informative, weightlifting manga.
Yeah.
In the same exact magazine, does it at the same time Omega's going on. It's very odd to see almost that you get the prose and the writing style of Sandrovich, where he goes deep in the muscles, but the jarring differences between art styles of this this like heavy line or dark line, very intense art style compared to this sometimes intense but very lewd and etchy kind of like when they're showing off body muscle groups. Obviously the girls are scantily clad, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I just like to see growth, whether that be from a story standpoint or from an artistic side. It's good to see. And yeah, I just love to see it.
Yeah, and I mean, like with Ippo, there was a moment called that, like I affectionately refer to as the slap, and it is one of the most like jarring illustrations that I've seen in Ippo, just for how off kilter and off style it was for George to draw it, and it shows like a mental break. Like the weight of everything that Ippo has been doing finally crashes down on him. He snaps mentally for a split second, and you just see it in this drawing where Ippo just pulls back and rocks a guy across the face. But it is shocking, and I think the only place Ippo's biggest weakness is its romance aspects. It's absolutely trash in its romance aspects.
I think a lot of sports series in general don't really have romance as now this is another topic in itself, where you would say boxing and MMA manga do not follow the same formula as standard sports series in sense where you have this high school spring tournament, they lose, they go back to training, and they go to the big Japanese school tournament, and then they eventually win that one, and then obviously it usually ends.
I'm sorry, it sounds like you're talking about iShield 21 right there.
Or Haikyuu, or Kuriko's No Basketball, or literally
every other.
It follows the same exact formula. However, and there's little to no romance. Usually it's there's maybe one or two romantic options, but even then it's mainly focused on the boys playing sports and stuff.
The only one that I think did really well with that was Hinamaru Zumo. I think did actually pretty well with the romance.
Oh, I don't even want to talk about that.
Oh, come on.
It got canceled for a reason. Anyway, but back to the main point. These boxing mangas, Baki's is ridiculous. Baki's father suggested if he wants to get a power up, he needs to fall in love with a girl. So essentially, Baki's power up is having intercourse with. That's his whole power up. He gets literally a massive boost in power just by having just fornicating with his girlfriend all day. That's kind of ridiculous. It's over the top. I don't even know what to think about it. Kengan kind of has some romance, but I wouldn't even call it romance because the dude's not even interested in the girl. All he cares about is fighting, but she wants to she comes from a heritage of producing this, like mixing genes of the strongest fighters and kind of building up the next strongest generation. I don't know how Ippo really works.
He doesn't get boner power-ups, he gets actual training. And I think that's the other important thing, is it shows the actual training that he goes through, and they explain why he does it. It's not just like, oh, he's punching a tree for 5 years. It's, oh, he's doing X to build Y. So you can actually see the training have a legitimate outcome. And it's based on, I mean, obviously slightly outdated science, but it's based on that 90s understanding of boxing science.
How do you have an opinion on how long a training arc should be? Because in theory, Baki's first 22 volumes is a training arc. It's in my opinion, it's too long. I don't think Kengan doesn't have a training arc because the main character somehow has lost his memory, kind of, and then kind of unlocks it as the fight and tournament goes on. And then obviously, I don't know how Ippo, but obviously it's boxing. There has to be a lot of training.
So I think the training, so there's two different kinds of training arcs in Ippo, but there's the overall like training camp training arc where they go to a training camp, and it's just a couple chapters, like 5 to 10 chapters at most, where they're training on a beach or they're training in the forest, right? and it's specifically to try to get one thing across. But the second kind of training is more along the lines of fight preparation training.
Do you think that has, since mixed martial arts has so many different like training styles and things you have to do, like for example, like punching sand over like for 5 years, or punching tree posts, or just like in general, there's so much you could possibly do for MMA training compared to what you could. Obviously boxing has variants, but obviously you can't keep spicing it up after 1,300 chapters, if you know what I mean, or what I'm trying to say.
Right and wrong. I'll agree with you on the fact that it would be difficult to spice up the training if it was just focused on one aspect. If it was focused on making him a better puncher, yeah, you can't do much with that. But if you think of each fight as a different kind of chess game, because, you know, let's be honest here, fighting is, at certain points, depending on how you prep for it, a chess game. So each fight, you almost have to start this. You can either start with building on what you had last time, or you take a look at the next opponent and say, all right, what I did last time isn't going to be as effective. I need to either come up with a new move, and it's not like I have to come up with a Kamehameha wave every single time. It's, okay, I'm really good at a hook. All right, well, let's work on the uppercut next time. That kind of thing. And it focuses on, there was one where he spent the entire time, where he spent the training arc just exclusively building up his lung capacity. Because the guy that he was going up against was a deep sea diver, like a deep sea free diver, who had a very good lung capacity in boxing. And in fighting, you know, the less that he has to breathe, the better his actual fighting tank is, supposedly. Anyway.
Do they have wacky backstories in Ippo as well?
Compared to most shonen, no. There are a few that you're kind of like, all right, that's a little bit, you know, one guy was a leader of a gang when he was growing up. One guy was the prodigy growing up, so it's not like, oh, he lived in the wilderness and he fought bears for a living. I mean, there was one scene where a guy fought a bear, but that was more. That was not so much he fought a bear. It's he punched a bear in the face and then ran away screaming.
There's two backstories that I really like in Kengan, of where this dude was a hockey pro, and you know how hockey players are prone to boxing.
Mm-hmm.
He was the best hockey brawler. He was feared. So his fighting, there's actually three. I'm just going to do a quick. So he's best at fighting off balance or in precarious positions.
Yeah.
Like he can punch full power from the on his back, essentially.
Yeah.
There was another fighter who was a deep sea fisherman who was so accustomed to the sea that when he fought on land, he actually wasn't at full power until he got roundhouse kicked in the face, and it gave him a concussion, in which it brought back
that equilibrium,
swaying motion, and then he kicked it into high gear. And then there was another fighter who was the reincarnation of a Hindu fighting god. However, when Nintendo came to poach the fighter, he made him succumb to otaku culture. He gained 400 pounds.
I remember that guy. Yeah.
Sweaty otaku mess, but he still has that innate physical, capabilities despite being massively obese. It's very, there's some wacky tropes. I believe one of the guy was so in love with Disneyland, he got suckered into the position because he could be the mascot to Disney World.
I think Ippo's characters are more grounded than that.
Yeah.
Like they're much more they're like, you could bump into somebody on the street and you'd be like, okay, like I could see this character being in real life. Even the ones that are slightly more outlandish, like there's one guy who just, his main job, he's genuinely a talented boxer, but he saw that he couldn't ever make it to the top of the world, so instead he maintains the level that he's at, but he approaches the different camps and says, I'll throw the fight. If you give me X amount of money, I'll throw the fight and make you look good.
It's exactly it. Obviously some of these characters are super eccentric, and obviously I don't think they can exist, but there's like one guy is a hired mercenary, and at one point he was like, I can't keep getting damaged. I'm just going to forfeit, which you didn't see coming. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
It it's just the I think it all comes down to being unpredictable is the main thing I look for in, especially in a series that is so almost one-dimensional, because it is
tournament arcs.
It's a tournament arc, or it has multiple tournament arcs. That you gotta have interesting exposition in the downtime. You have to have a draw, and it has to be unpredictable, because if you keep going through the same shonen tournament formula, over and over again, I think shonen series that do one tournament arc can pull it off, because that's the only one they're ever going to do, and it's usually very short. But when all you're doing is just doing the same thing over and over again, you have to spice it up. You have to be unpredictable, and I think that's where a lot of shonen series, especially people doing tournament arcs, need to prioritize or focus on.
Yeah, and like I said, I think for Ippo, I think Ippo had to learn how to walk before a lot of these others could learn how to. I think Ippo had to try to run before a lot of these others could basically walk, which I know sounds really, really weird.
No, it's not, because I think series that have to build up a character can focus on that said character, and I think when series have already a strong character that doesn't really need. While his personality, like the main protagonist of Kengan grows and personality-wise, he's still almost the same overpowered dude he was. But the real reason is you have to have a strong supporting cast of characters. Same with like One Punch Man, like Saitama. He's cool for 7 or 8 chapters that first season. It's really cool, but then you got to keep going with that shtick. And I think the supporting characters really lift up. Like, if you only read One Punch Man for Saitama, I think you're going to be massively disappointed or get bored. I think if you're going in, liking Saitama and then end up falling in love with these said side characters, I think that is when you see that series be elevated in some people's opinions, rather than this is getting boring. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And like I said, I think that's a huge thing, is just how you can build up the world, right? That's a good mangaka builds up not only their character, like the main character, but he builds up the ancillary characters to help carry the story along. If you only have one good character, your story's dead in the water.
Agreed, fully, 100%.
We are nearing the end of our hour, which sucks, but it means that there's so much more to discuss for next time. Next time, I'm going to try to convince you to read Ippo. That way I can...
I have so much. I've just recently reread Kengan Ashura, and I've reread Omega as well. I read Ashura in 5 days. Once you get past the first 5-volume exposition hump, it blows by. You can crank that out, in my opinion, and it's definitely worth it for sure.
Oh yeah, but as always, I like to ask 2 questions at the end of all the manga clubs. One is the joke question, and one is a serious question. So we're going to start off with the serious question today. If you had to recommend one anime in the top 10 MyAnimeList to subtract from there, to take out, what would it be?
If I had to remove
a top 10 MyAnimeList anime.
Hunter x Hunter. There we go.
Are we talking OG Hunter x Hunter or overall?
2011 hiatus ex hiatus. It is overrated. It is honestly a little bit weird how certain characters, I won't go into it here, but there's certain characters that are very sketchy, and they shouldn't be people's favorite characters, despite obvious signs that this character is not thinking correctly. Is it
who I think it is?
He's a clown. That's all I gotta say.
He is. Yep, that's exactly who I thought you were gonna say. Just like everyone idolizes Snape from Harry Potter. I'm like, dude, he's a 32-year-old man who bullied 11-year-olds.
Hisoka is. If you do some deep diving into Hisoka, you're gonna find some stuff that you probably don't want to see. So that's all I gotta say. If we're gonna do manga, I'm going to take out Pun Pun, because what's his stupid name? What's the author's name?
I know exactly. Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Asano. Yeah, I dislike Asano with a burning passion. You could argue One Piece doesn't deserve to be at number 4, but other than that, also if you read JoJo's past part 4, that you're a pirate, What else can I say? Kingdom doesn't deserve to be that high because no one's gonna read it. Grand Blue is the only good thing on that list.
Okay, let's be honest here. If Kingdom was translated into English, it would be high. It would deserve to be there.
Possibly.
I love Kingdom.
I also just don't think it is a business, like that is not a smart business move as to why it's not here, because
it's so popular.
It would not sell here because how it does work is the first couple volumes sell a lot and then the last few volumes sell, and you have to pay for the license up front. So you're essentially paying for 50, 60 something volumes straight off the bat, and you are stuck into that agreement even if people stop buying it at volume 11. That's why you see companies start putting volumes together. Like take Yamada and the Seven Witches. They did like 16 volumes, and they started you start seeing these licensors start combining volumes together into one. That's why, because they're stuck into this contract, and because it's not selling well. They got to get rid of. They just got to bundle it together and cut their losses.
That's for me. Whenever somebody asks me about Ippo or Kingdom, I'm like, listen, if they're going to do either one of those two and bring them over to English at all, they have to, and I'm talking 100% have to create omnibuses for them. Like you have to. There's no other way to sell 137.
You won't see Ippo or Kingdom in English, but I have a gut feeling you might see Ashita no Joe from Kodansha in a few years. That's my gut opinion.
I think Ashita no Joe is going to be. Yeah, I agree.
It's 20 volumes. It's owned by Kodansha. Kodansha, if you go through their list of licenses that they have, they got nothing. All the good stuff they have is locked behind digital-only platforms. Attack on Titan's ending. Seven Deadly Sins is ending. A lot of their mainstay series are ending. So they're going to have, as you can tell, their older titles. I don't see a reason why they don't do Ashita no Joe. It's 20 volumes. It's right on that limit. Companies don't like to do more than 20 volumes because it's usually have to produce it at a loss, a profit. But 20 volumes, Ashita no Joe, it's a classic.
If I was going to do Ashita no Joe, I would create an anime movie for it first, and then sell the manga on the back end for it. Because there hasn't been an anime for it since 1980, 1981 was the anime television series Ashita no Joe 2. And you have to, if they did an anime and then they sold the manga on top of it, almost a remastered version, I think that's where they'd make their money.
It's the sad truth and a hard pill to swallow that a lot of these series that get licensed are only because of these series getting anime adaptations. A lot of series do not. You wouldn't see JoJo's getting licensed in English if it wasn't for the anime. In my opinion, it wouldn't happen. So
I mean, I think Demon Slayer is going to be the same way. It was an okay anime. It wasn't amazing. It wasn't.
It sold way too many volumes this year. It sold more volumes in a 6-month span than One Piece ever has in an entire year, which is kind of nutty.
I think part of that comes down to the anime was so hyped, and with One Piece, it's just been going on for so long. There's nothing to get hyped. There's nothing to blow it out of the water except for a good arc, and even then, a good chapter does not make a good sale.
That's very true, but I know you don't want to hear it, but I believe One Piece has failed in attracting new readers in this decade. I don't think it has done anything to help itself in the current Shonen Jump market, in my opinion.
I can agree to that. I think it's. I love One Piece. I'm a full One Piece stan, but right now it's such a long-running series. It can't. To pull in a new audience, you have to get them to read 900 plus chapters. 982 chapters right now. I mean, I hate to tell you that that's not going to be successful. The actual attention span of consumers now is so much different than it was in 1999. Like, the biggest reason why I'm able to keep up with One Piece is because I've followed it for 12 years. I followed it since I was, 13, 14, since I was young. Whereas kids now, they're 11, 12, 13, and they're saying 900 chapters. They're like, nope, I can go read 4 more. I can read 5 series with that 900 chapters.
We don't have to. I know we're getting short on time, but I just want to compare. Like, if you compare the first 200 chapters of My Hero Academia to the first 200 of One Piece is only at Alabasta. It's not even done with it. One Piece or My Hero Academia has done. It seems like it's done so much more. I think it's one of the main reasons why Shonen Jump has started moving away from this almost year to 2 year arc size, and everything is so condensed and not being dragged out for too long. They're ending series when they should end instead of when they already should have ended.
And I think that's a downside for One Piece, because when it started, Naruto, Bleach, One Piece, they were told you have to drag this out until it's not popular anymore. Basically, is what they were told. Now Shonen Jump is feeling more confident in their ability to say, okay, we can stop you right here. We'll bring in somebody else. Like, stop when the sales start to go down. We'll bring it in. I think One Piece could have trimmed fat in certain areas. Again,
I think New World. I think the first 3 arcs could be deleted.
I don't know if they could have been deleted. I think they could have been.
All right, my mistake. I think Dressrosa needed to be trimmed. Punk Hazard, you could throw that out, and Fishman Island is a waste of time.
Fishman Island is a waste of time, mainly because they keep putting... The only reason why Luffy struggles at all with Fishman Island is because Oda didn't want to end it. He's like, Zoro beat Cody Jones in the water while he was running out of breath, not at full power, and Zoro beat him. There's no reason that Luffy should have even had an eighth of a struggle against him. He should have Red Hawked him, first punch, Fishman Island, to show how overwhelmingly powerful Luffy and the crew had gotten in that 2 years. You make it 20 chapters. Boom. Get in, introduce the people that you're going to be talking with, get Jinbei in there a little bit, defeat Horty Jones in 1 fight. Not 3 fights, 1 fight, and call it.
I think I'd be curious to see if One Piece once it's done, I'd be curious if someone ever goes back and trims all the fat off of One Piece. Like they did. You remember the guy from that 70s show? You remember how he made the Star Wars? He edited a bunch of film and cut off all the... Yeah, something like that. Maybe way down the line, I'd like to see a condensed version of One Piece. I think that would be really, really cool. I kind of wish that Oda would go through and do it himself. I get crap for saying that the current arc is not good it's a flashback within a flashback, and I get a little bit of a heated response whenever I make that comment. So
I like the current arc because I have a feeling I know what's going to happen, and it makes me excited.
That's fair.
This is there's going to be 2 more. I think One Piece has 2 arcs left. After this one, there's 2 arcs, and then it's done.
So within 10 years?
Within 10 years? I think within 7 years. Because it's not going to be... Here's if you follow Oda's storytelling, he does 1 big arc, then he does a cooldown arc. Then he does a big arc, cooldown arc. And he keeps doing big arc, cooldown arc. So it's going to be big arc right now, cooldown arc, final arc. And that's how it's going to be. It's going to be Wano, cooldown, final.
Isn't there another arc after, isn't there another big arc teased after Wano? Am I crazy?
No, it's actually happening right now. It's happening in tandem, so it won't be a full arc. Okay. You're thinking of the, I can't think what's, Reverie. You're thinking of Reverie right now.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be, Reverie isn't going to be a full arc because they've been hinting at it, interspersely cut with the actual manga itself. So they'll be dropping hints and it'll be good to go. But, final question. If you could be any character from a manga that is not a fighting manga, who would it be?
Does that consider shonen battle manga?
Let's just stick with MMA sports fighting manga. You have to choose somebody from not one of those.
Oh, if I could be any character, you know what? I'd probably... You know what? I think I'd go with Escanor from the 7 Deadly Sins.
Ooh.
The aesthetic of being the most arrogant son of a gun ever. I don't know if you've ever gotten to Escanor's part in 7 Deadly Sins, but that dude is arrogance personified.
I dropped 7 Deadly Sins.
Pretty much when as he gains power, he's a complete weakling.
Oh yeah.
But as the sun rises and he gets more cocky and arrogant, and his power grows and grows and grows, he is he's one of my favorite characters. He's the only reason I'm still reading 7 Deadly Sins.
Straight up I dropped 7 Deadly Sins because I I know exactly what you're talking about because I've read past that point. I read the entire Ten Commandments arc all the way through.
Yeah.
I've read the Purgatory arc too. And then after I got done with the Purgatory arc, I was like, no, I'm done. I was like, you can't. I was like, this should have ended at this certain point. I'm done.
I don't blame you.
Just like I dropped what is that? I dropped The Promised Neverland after Goldie Pond.
I actually stopped reading The Promised Neverland right after the first season because at the time, and then I just stopped reading it. Well, I have 15 volumes of it. I just haven't read it. It's one of those series that I continue to buy, but I don't read. It's probably one of the very few series I do that with. I'm not. I got to a point I was like, nah, I already can see. Like, it's done after 182 chapters, but it should have been done after 120. Yeah, I can see it. Some of it doesn't make any sense, but whatever.
Yeah.
I just Escanor. I do that man. I love that man.
All right, so let everyone know what you kind of have coming up, and then we'll have you linked down in the description below, but we will be signing out here pretty shortly. So, Based, what do you have coming up in the next few weeks?
I have a haul coming up whenever Right Stuff decides to send it out. I placed that order in April. It is now June 15th, and I still haven't got confirmation on that order. So whenever that comes, I'll be sure to upload it. I have a top 20 manga video I have said I do. I kind of need to read 2 or 3 series again to see where on placement, but expect maybe a top 20 video in the near future. TM, don't expect it, but it's in the pipe works.
It exists somewhere in your mind, so it's close.
It's actually written on a sheet of paper in my notebook. I just have to do 11. Okay, 1 to 10 is solid. I think I could rearrange some of the things in like 2 to 4, but other than that, it's the 11 to 20 that I'm really having problems with. So that's why I'm rereading a few things.
List videos are a lot harder than people think they are.
Yeah. It's especially when you get higher up, you don't even care where they're. As long as they're on there, you really just don't even care where they're at. But I kind of want to make, I kind of want to make it a little bit official.
Yeah, like the official Based Sempai MyAnimeList sponsored top 20.
Don't look at that. Don't look at their top 20 manga list before you watch my video. That's all I gotta say.
I mean, we know that something's not on there. It's at number 37, and you're gonna put it in your list anyway.
Death Note's in the top 20. That's for sure.
And where's it at in the manga again? Number 37? No, that's the anime. You're right. In the manga, it's at 58.
Are you sure about that?
I'm like 90% sure.
Because I thought I just looked at it the other day, and it was like in the top 50.
It might be. Is it? Did I get it mixed up again? I usually get it mixed up, so I could very well be wrong.
Death Note's 29 in the manga.
Oh, it jumped up. Oh, and then the anime.
I don't think it jumped. I think it definitely. Yeah, it's okay.
Wait, it's in 29 on yours?
Yeah, you just type in top manga. You probably have. When you go to all manga, it counts one shots, manhwa, novels, light novels. So I always just do top manga because that's because honestly, I don't count light novels as manga, and I don't count doujin as manga, and you know what I mean.
No one counts doujin as manga. Shouldn't anyway.
Like I believe if you go like all manga, like Solo Leveling isn't there, but if you go all manga, Solo Leveling is number 12. It's a manhwa essentially.
Death Note, so that's why I was right. On the anime, it does say, like, all anime, it's number 58.
Yeah, and then it's 38 on, if you count all manga.
Yeah, so, I was wrong. I apologize.
It's okay to be wrong. Mal's always right.
Hey, I accept it, which is why, One Piece is number 5.
Berserk number 1.
Berserk, if Berserk were actually to finish, I'd be more willing to give the number 1 spot.
Yeah, I feel it.
I'd be like, okay, yeah, that's fine. But anyway, for everyone new and old, welcome and welcome back. It's your boy Lohali, and I will see you next video.
Peace.